welcome. I'm Joanne Law, Director of Studies for Mediation Institute and co-founder of Interact Support. I'm on a mission to prevent violence by training and supporting dispute resolution practitioners. Mediation Musings is a series of conversations with mediators and for mediators. So if you're interested in dispute resolution, follow the channel. We're intending to update new recordings each week. Enjoy. Today I've got Mary Davenport with me, speaking about her experience and what she's up to. So welcome, Mary.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. So Mary's actually a graduate of Mediation Institute, so trained in mediation and is an accredited family dispute resolution practitioner, but doing some other really, really interesting work that I do want to talk with you about, Mary. But perhaps before we go on to that, I'd really like to get your thoughts about your experience of training as a mediator, but then doing something else, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. It's a really interesting question. I think training as a mediator and as a family dispute practitioner is just part of the bigger picture for me. And considering where the climates are in relation to court processes, going to court and all that sort of thing. I think doing the mediator course and the family dispute practitioner course is absolutely fantastic. It's definitely a must. But for me, it was just a piece of the puzzle, which absolutely taught me so much in relation to giving people an opportunity to make their own decisions, especially going through a separation. Trying to do it amicably, trying to do it keeping it out of court, trying to reduce the essence of conflict and being future focused. And reality testing is so profound. If there's anything that I will say that was really important to me, that led me on to what I'm doing now, was the concept of reality testing. And that is, how does it look like? How does it pan out? How does it actually go by day to day? Can it be done? What are the ramifications? What are the repercussions? And how does this little ripple affect the rest of your day-to-day work? Because all too often, especially, and I say it sincerely, a lot of agencies who do family dispute practitioner are really happy just to get that consent order.
Yeah.
But how many times, Jo, have we seen that consent order being used as a tool to create further conflict?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and it's a major issue of for our industry not to be happy with that. Oh, it's an agreement. Let's lock it in quick.
Yeah.
We want to break it in the mediation, because if we can break it in the mediation, it's not good enough. But,
yeah.
Then we can recreate it something that's going to be more robust, or have a plan in place for when they can't agree, or whatever, so they don't end up in conflict again. So easily. That's great, because that's something that we really try to impart in our students. But your background, before you trained as a mediator, you were doing casework and that sort of thing. So what's your experience there? Where have you come from?
Basically, I was doing casework / counselling, and I was working in a domestic violence specialist field under a legal banner, which I won't mention any names. God bless them, they taught me a lot. And I actually saw, not only that, from a personal lived experience, a conflict I went through in dealing with, the legal process, and if I can say it sincerely, it was very, very clinical.
Yeah.
You will do this is what's done, and all the rest of it. And that reality testing way back 20 odd years ago wasn't there. It was very court ordered. Yeah. And you had this obligation to fulfill these court orders, which was really difficult to manage in reality. Managing AVOs, managing children, managing court orders, living in a small community, and trying to avoid the conflict while the consent orders was creating a conflict.
Yeah.
you know, and there was too many shades of grey, too many opportunities for interpretations, too many opportunities to work the system, so to speak. Yeah. So it was really difficult. And I remember going through that frustration, desperation, and such sadness that this is not what I wanted for me and my family. Because I thought once that separation was over, it was done. But unfortunately, it wasn't.
No. Yeah.
It potentially was only just the start.
Absolutely.
So having that lived experience and sort of getting into, you know, domestic violence counselling and casework by default, many, many years down the track, I thought, oh, there's got to be a better process. The process was a little bit more spoken about and a little bit more open. But however, the process was much the same, Jo. You know, very much the same. And I'm thinking there are just a lot of areas of all the shades of grey that this can go terribly wrong.
Yeah, well, it feels to me sometimes like the tool has taken over the process, and it gets forgotten that this whole family law system is designed to help keep families safe and help them to sort out looking after their kids and splitting their stuff. Like, it's about the people, but it becomes, as you said, about the orders and trying to follow the orders, but the orders are meant to be a tool for you. But
absolutely.
Then you become a victim of that tool. It's yeah, there's some opportunities for improvement, certainly. Now, I really, really want to talk about Maggie's legacy and what you're doing now. I've been, since you graduated, I've been keeping an eye on what you're up to, and well, as you know, but as the listeners don't know, we've been discussing about how we can incorporate some of your insights and some of what you've been working in that, particularly in that area, into the Mediation Institute training, particularly our safety planning training, which is part of our family dispute resolution skill set. Oh, we think it should be, definitely. So tell me maybe first, what's Maggie's legacy?
Very interesting question, Joan. I don't know how much time you've got, but if I go back to why Maggie's legacy happened, it still gives me the shivers that I'm happy to share about it. As I mentioned to you earlier, having that lived experience 20 odd years ago and then coming into domestic violence counselling and working in a legal firm purely by default, by accident, I had, and especially in relation to counselling, I had an understanding, or had hoped, that that time frame would have improved the processes, that there would have been some sort of insight to the conflict or the shades of grey or the confusion a victim goes through. And one of the first questions when I embarked on domestic violence counselling, I asked, so where's your manual, where's your formula, where's your process, thinking that these processes have changed. And I was told, there's a Duluth Wheel of Violence, and we have a trauma-informed practice, and that's how we operate. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm going back on my own personal experience. There's so much more to domestic violence than just the Duluth Wheel of Violence. And trauma-informed is really, it's a great therapy, it's a great tool, but especially in crisis situations, we just don't have time for that.
Yeah.
So,
and sometimes it's just used as lip service. And if you ask people, what does that mean? How do you do that? You may not actually find that there's much depth there.
And not only that, there's really a lot of differences in understandings what trauma-informed is.
Yeah.
It's your interpretation. It's a marriage of everything you know at that point in time. But in relation to domestic violence, the trauma-informed therapies and the Duluth Wheel of Violence didn't explain the one simple statement that I would sit back and think, wow. And the comment would be either from a male or a female victim, it's much the same. You know, they were violent towards me, but they're a great parent.
Yes.
and the severity of the violence was extreme.
Mm.
Or they were violent and they were abusive, but they were under the influence of drug or alcohol. There was a corresponding excuse.
Yes.
So there was a perpetuation of, or a justification of, yeah, okay, but this is what happened and this was the excuse and it was my fault.
Yeah.
So there's a huge premise between the actual act and the actual understanding. The act and the understanding, or the excuse or the justification, there's a huge process of psychological conditioning that, unfortunately, in relation to domestic violence, the Duluth wheel of cycle of violence doesn't cut it, Jo.
No, it's a very simplistic model that misses the system in some ways. It's it's useful. It does describe things that happen, but it's not, it's quite old, and it hasn't, the way we're using it here hasn't really evolved as it needs to.
Yeah. So I've actually established the verb or the wording or the process that happens between those comments. I call it the psychological conditioning. And the psychological conditioning trains you to think a particular way.
Yeah.
And especially when you're trained, or a victim is trained to think a particular way, that language is then transpired into mediation, consent orders.
Yeah, absolutely, because they're genuinely, or it sounds like genuinely saying, it's okay. And as a mediator, maybe we take what they're saying to be what is true.
Yeah. So it's difficult. And I was one of those mums. I was one of the, yes, they were violent, but a great dad. So when I actually came to doing my own consent orders, I allowed for the consent orders to allow for contact, a form of contact.
Yeah.
And it was all above board,
yeah.
approved by the courts. Yet that contact was the very hub of further conflict.
So those changeover times, those times
yeah.
where, there's an opportunity to.
Yeah. So coming back to mediation, it was very profound through the course that I'd done through the Mediation Institute, was reality testing. Reality testing, and that stepping stone led me into, there is a grey area in reality testing in relationship to the psychological conditioning.
Yes.
A victim goes through during an experience of domestic violence that then will reflect on their agreeing certain aspects of a consent order.
Yeah. And you think you've cracked this chestnut?
Look, I wouldn't say, I'd love to say I have, but there's always room for improvement, Jo. And I think if there's any way that I could say that I've cracked the chestnut, is that I've really simplified that language in Maggie's legacy. And the results are profound, Jo, in being able to counsel both men and women when we actually show them the framework of Maggie's legacy. It's the, oh my God moment. It's the wow moment. It's the, how are you making this decision? On what premise are you making this decision? And you can actually physically see it and physically feel it.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about trauma-informed and crisis situations, we need to be able to encourage or prompt or get a client to be able to make good decisions.
Yeah.
And this is where Maggie's legacy comes in, and looking forward to working with the Mediation Institute to making those sound, solid decisions at the time that can promote healing, that can promote the reduction of conflict, that can promote the well-being of their emotional and physical health, not only for themselves, but for their children.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the things in our course is talking about myths related to family violence. And for me, one of the most dangerous myths is that victims of violence know how to keep themselves safe. If that was the case, we wouldn't have so many people being murdered or hurt.
Yeah. And the myth is, initially they do know how to keep themselves safe,
Yeah.
But because they have been desensitized by whatever situation, oh, they won't do that or whatever it is. And not only that, that's part of the psychological conditioning to downplay
Yes.
the severity of safety.
Yeah, because you can't, they struggle with that that issue of, they're a great dad, but they hurt me. And, they've got to reconcile that somewhere and, put the...
I want to put a challenge out. I have come up with a challenge, and I share this in my workshops. Anyone who's done suicide prevention training, it's a therapeutic tool that if they've shared that they intend to commit harm, hurt themselves, if they've established a plan, we as mandatory reporters have to act on it.
Yeah.
It's legislative. It's a tool. It's a guide. Straight out suicide. If you're thinking, if you've verbalized it, established a plan, we actually have to act on it to stop the person from doing that. So my question is, or my challenge is, why is it any different for domestic violence?
Yeah.
If a perpetrator has threatened a person and then given, say, I will kill you by slitting your throat, why is that marriage not replicated in the therapies that we've had from suicide prevention?
Yeah, very, very good question. It's well, an intervention order will often be put in place, but maybe there's a bit of a gap after that sometimes.
Yeah. So this is what I share through the workshops. If there's that, when we're actually doing our safety assessments, we talk about, let's look at the event, the threat, the whatever it is. But and I say it sincerely, that understanding or that excuse, I'm seeing that psychological conditioning language coming through.
Yeah. And so helping both professionals and the people themselves to hear that language, to hear that they're, they're making excuses, they're justifying things that they shouldn't. Is that part of, I guess, helping to overcome this problem? That
very much so. And we talk about, in Maggie's Legacy, we talk about the tentacles of obligation. And the tentacles of obligation can filter through, we call it two strategies, a relational tentacle or a transactional tentacle. And the overarching tentacle is the tentacle of obligation, and what you feel you have to do or what you feel you want to do. So when it comes back to mediation and consent orders, there's a lot of pressure or indirect undercurrent of pressure. Society tells me I have to share the children. Whereas in the back of her mind, or the male's mind, or the victim's mind, is that there is a condition, like he's put a knife to my throat. Let's escalate the situation. But I'm sure he won't do it to my children. And my question is, are you confident?
Yes.
Are you 110% guaranteed that that will never happen to your children?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So we look at what has transpired, because that information is an indicator of what potentially can happen in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Someone's got the capacity to do that to another human being.
Yeah.
That's within their range. That's, like, that's not within my range. Like, I can't possibly imagine a situation where I do that. But, for that person it is. Like the other day I did an intake with someone. She had a minimum, absolute minimum, not commit family violence order. There were no other restrictions on it. But she told me in the pre-mediation session that he'd choked her, like in one of the incidents. He'd had his hands around her throat, choking her. She can't remember anything after that. She'd never told anyone. Like, she's got a family violence service she is working with. She's been to the family violence court. She's got a psychologist she's working with, but she hadn't told anyone that it got to that level. And the very, very minimum intervention order, indicates that the system doesn't know. Yeah. So
And in that alone, Joe, there's a lot of people, victims will say, look, I'm really scared to disclose.
mm,
I'm really scared to disclose, especially in rural, remote, Indigenous communities. They're scared to disclose because there's that level, A, of judgment, and B, there's a fear of their children being removed.
yeah, yeah, that's a massive, yeah, because you're working in regional areas.
Yeah.
Huge,
And fortunately, and I'm not saying it happens all the time, but there are some now agencies that'll say if they're working with a victim, if there's a non-for-profit agency working with a victim, their last step is to remove the children. But it goes back to the initial instant, A, I'm scared to disclose because I'm fear I'm going to be judged. B, I have such shame that, can you imagine if, I'm living this fairy tale lifestyle on Facebook, Twitter, whatever social media, and I don't want to break that veil of my life is happy and wonderful. And then the repercussions of, if I do share the severity of it, I'm wondering how I'm going to manage mandatory reporting, children, all the rest of it. So for a client, and this is what I really, really share in Maggie's Legacy.
yeah,
If a victim commences to share her story, consider yourself blessed.
yeah,
Because it is huge. It is the biggest challenge that a victim will ever have, is to share the severity of their story.
yeah,
And I go through and I train people to say, to use there's a concept of judgment and understanding. If you sit down, and we all indirectly do it, I hear a story, and my story, like if a victim is sharing their story with police or legal or whatever it is, they're looking through eyes of judgment to map out their criteria.
yeah, yeah.
So you are not getting her full story, because the police will be looking for a criminal element. The legal people will be looking for, how do we map out this legal framework? The counsellor will be looking through it from a therapeutic perspective. But the best thing you can do is sit back, not hear and look through eyes of judgment. Look and hear through eyes of understanding, because you will get so much more of the story.
Yeah.
Once you get more of that story, you then can go and make some assessment.
Yeah.
So in relation to Maggie's Legacy, and in complement to the Mediation Institute, Maggie's Legacy doesn't negate any other training. If anything, it enhances existing training.
Yeah.
Because it gives you the tools to get the bigger picture, to make a better answer, get a better answer.
No, that's wonderful, and that's what I'm getting from the work that you're doing. It really is about enhancing our understanding. So, like even the other day, we were talking about the cycle of violence, and you were saying that, well, is it a cycle or is it a spiral? And
yeah. Is it a cycle or a spiral? Because how that eventuated is that there's a language between counsellors, caseworkers, legal people, police, all the rest of it, that we have not identified. My understanding of this is escalating and we are in crisis mode is completely different to what the police would register, or what a legal person would register, or what a family member would register. So Maggie's Legacy helps identify through the spiral the terminology of crisis and escalation.
Yeah. No.
So we can actually map out not only what we can do, but the sense of urgency and how quick we need to get it done.
Yeah, because I think that's the really critical thing, because the wheels of this industry can grind very slowly.
Yeah.
And sometimes, the intention's there to do something, but that time gap between it is not in step with the urgency of what's going on. And, that needs to be identified, because that's where people are at most risk.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only that, Jo, just to take it a step further, that spiral, we talk about in relation to the Duluth Wheel of Violence, which is a beautiful platform to start with. But things have changed. We talk about it's the honeymoon stage, it's the explosion stage, it's the pursuit stage, it's this. But once a separation has happened, or as a process, what we call the escalation or the crisis situation happens, there's no more honeymoon, Jo.
Yeah.
And we've actually identified a process called once the honeymoon is gone, and we explain to our workshop participants how the honeymoon looks like when it's gone.
Yeah.
The pursuit isn't, look, I'm really sorry, I'll change, I'll do this. The pursuit is, we've called it hurt, harm, hide. And we break it down into different strategies from the relational perspective and the transactional perspective, opens up a whole new layer of understanding and the depth of potentially of the severity of what a client is going through.
Yeah.
So we've broken it down: honeymoon stage, hurt, harm, hide stage, and that's through that spiral. And when we've shared that concept, the amount of victims, oh my goodness, I can see it. And once they can see it, they make better decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's why I really like what you're doing, because you're putting things into models, you're making them visible, you're making them so people can get it. You know, you can have a whole lot of words, but if you put it into something like that, hurt, harm, hide, right, okay, that's what's going on. I understand. And then that helps to peel back the corner of that conditioning. And
absolutely. Yeah. And once you peel back the corner of that conditioning, it helps mediators and family practitioners because they make better decisions.
Yes. Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we have to go on consent. It's an agreement.
Yeah.
But if we get to show them aspects of what potentially their story might be, you empower the client to make those decisions that they then can manage down the track.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And the other thing I notice in your language is that you're talking about men and women, and that's something that's a huge concern for me, because we've got this kind of really one-sided approach. Women and their children totally negates the violence that's occurring against men, and it kind of simplifies things more than is real. I don't know, what's your opinion about that, about violence happening for men?
Yeah, look, and I will make this qualification. Maggie's legacy was stemmed by the violence or the imbalance of power between men and women, purely women being the victim. By default and purely by chance, we had an opportunity to share Maggie's legacy with a coordinator of a male perpetrator program. And he was just blown away. And he said to me, Mez, I really need to get you to show this to the boys. I'm thinking, right, okay. And I thought about it and I thought, wow, you know. And the way the actual program works out in relational, transactional, tentacles of obligation, I look for ways to try and make it appealing to men without being condescending and judgmental and all the rest of it. And I tailored it back to a football theme.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, we can give it a crack. I think it'll work. But when we actually went and delivered it, the aha moment and the light bulb moment when we related it back to a football theme was phenomenal. There was some, following the workshop, one of the gentlemen said to his acting coordinator, you know, that Maggie's legacy getting into a football theme was really good. Then I'm taking my missus out shopping. Now, this gentleman had been out in the perpetrator program for over 12 months.
Yeah.
And that was something, you know, anger management, healthy relationships, all the rest of it, was trying to communicate with him. And I was so blessed to hear that he realised, you know, there's different languages we talk, again, relating back to the football theme. And one of the things is that I'm not going to tell you how your partner will feel loved. How about you ask her, eliminate the guessing game and just ask her. So he did. And she said, I want you to take me shopping. God bless him, he did. Yeah. So if Maggie's legacy, talking about domestic violence in a non-judgmental understanding, this is a cycle we can all get sucked into for whatever reasons, and this is perhaps a different way to think, to get that sort of results, I think we're on a winner, Joe.
No, that's yeah. Look, it's great because that's the thing. Like, unless we can connect with both parties in that relationship, we're not. You know, like the dynamic's not going to change. And yeah, maybe the relationship ends. Maybe they end up splitting up. But there's going to be another relationship, and
Yeah.
and so we can't. We can't marginalize anyone and leave them thinking that it's okay to to try and coerce your partner into
Yeah.
the way you want, because that's where it's it's a lot of it stems down to.
And how many clients say, I've just left another DV situation and now I'm in another one. How does this happen?
Yeah.
How does this happen?
Yeah. Do you want to know? We've got some insights for you.
Well, I can give you a bit of an insight and tell me how it feels for you.
Yeah.
And usually 100% of the time is, they have that light bulb moment and
Yeah.
a lot of tears. And we actually, just by showing them the framework, I'm not telling them what to do, but they will work out what to do on their own.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of Maggie's Legacy and the process of mediation and family dispute. You have a say.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the power, because, if people are making the decisions themselves, making informed decisions, they're much, much more likely to be adhered to work, to be able to be adjusted as they need to, than something that's imposed.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, that's, there's plenty of studies that show that, the compliance with consent orders is much higher than the compliance of court orders.
Yeah.
I can't remember the study, but I have seen seen that, because no one wants to be told what to do. It's
Yeah.
no,
And no one, more importantly, wants to be told how they should feel.
no, and that, I think that is part of the problem with some of these perpetrator programs, where they feel that way. That's what people have, people that have been through those programs tell me, and sometimes they pay lip service, they do what they need to do to get their certificate at the end.
Yeah.
But there's just resistance because they're being told what to think.
Yeah. And if I just want to add to that, I've had the opportunity to train a football team.
Yeah.
And I was going into it like, wow, this is going to be a tough gig, especially with all the media profile of, high profile players, acting untoward and all the rest of it. So we actually expanded that football theme throughout Maggie's Legacy. And I was just so humbled to see big macho football players taking notes and asking questions and thinking, wow, we get it. And a lot of the time I ask them, what do you want from this? And they say, look, it's part of our community. We want to do something by the community, but we really don't know how to talk to one of our bros, if he's acting out of order. We just sort of avoid it. It's awkward, we just, and it's going to affect the team and the reputation of the team, and how do we talk about it? And so that's what we were targeting, especially in the football team and from a community perspective. And look, I was just so humbled to see them taking notes and asking questions, and they think, we get it, because we've brought it back to a football theme, and they say, bro, she's on our side, and it just changes that. It's not a cognitive behavior program, it's heart transformation, understanding. If you have that simple understanding of respect and disrespect and judgment and understanding, relational, transactional, it maps out beautifully that, footballers are taking note. So I'm pretty impressed with Maggie, Jack, if I can say that.
No, she's definitely left a legacy. So how do people engage with what you're doing? How do they run a program with their sports club or with their workers? Or
we have a website, and the website's www.maggieslegacy.com.au. We have an inquiry form there. They're on the website. There's contact numbers. Just feel free to give us a ring or send us an email. Say we would like to know more about this, and I'm happy to have a chat. We also have a Facebook page called Maggie's Legacy. And we do a number of blogs on that and different articles. And statistical results and that sort of thing on that as well. So we're easily accessible, and I'm happy to talk to anyone who wants to know more about Maggie's legacy.
Excellent, thank you. And so as I said, we're talking about doing something, bringing in a little bit of some of the insights from Maggie's legacy into our grad dip course, and possibly some workshops for members around the country as over the next while, and but also trying to distill some of the knowledge out of that into a course that'll be accessible for people. So at the moment, you're pretty much doing it as a workshop style training, is that?
Yeah, I'm doing it as a workshop style training. Sorry, Joe. But there's only one of me, and I've got some team members and all that sort of thing. But I'm particularly passionate about what the work the Mediation Institute does. So I'm happy to looking at doing some sort of workshops or online workshops, or doing some sort of a partnership to be able to broaden that understanding, especially from the legal perspective, because you're at the cold face of those decisions.
Yeah.
And it'd be my pleasure, and I'll be honoured to work with you guys.
I'm very excited about what we can do, because as you know, for me, the critical thing for me is accessibility. We're in a country, and particularly people in regional areas, it's really difficult to get good quality training, and so they're doing the best that they can with what they can do, and but it's good because it's really hard doing this work. It's really hard when you know in your gut there's something wrong, but the person's saying no, it's okay, they never hurt the kids, it's they love me really, and all this thing, and you think, oh, how do I?
Yeah, and I guess that's what I address, is that niggle,
that
nag that mediators and family practitioners have, that she's saying one thing, but I'm feeling something else.
Absolutely, because we care about people, and we want them to be safe, and we want them to be happy, and but having the skills and the tools and the frameworks that can help us to peel back that corner of the conditioning, so that it comes off, and the person can can see a bit clearer, perhaps.
Absolutely.
And what's going on.
Absolutely.
That's a pretty good thing to finish up on. I'm aware of time, and I knew this was going to be a problem with you, Mary, because we can talk all day long.
Absolutely.
Are there any final thoughts you want to leave the listeners with?
I just basically what I want to share is that I'm looking forward to the partnership that Mediation Institute and Maggie's Legacy can create in the future. I just want to reassure listeners that you don't need another uni degree for Maggie's Legacy. Maggie's Legacy is a very simple language, but it's a powerful language. And we have run a number of workshops in rural and Indigenous communities, and footballers, and Aboriginal medical services and staff. And I just want to make a qualification. You don't need a qualification. It is very simple. And once you think, why didn't anyone think of this beforehand? And then if you marry that understanding to the Mediation Institute, and with what you're training through mediation and family practitioner, the results that you will get will be profound, and you won't have that niggle. You can walk away thinking, I've just really helped a family, because at the end of the day, that's our job, and that's what our passion is to be able to decrease conflict, keep children safe, keep people happy, and out of the court system where someone else is going to make a decision for them.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Mary.
My pleasure, Jo. Thank you for having me.